Today I want to talk to you about a very important American right and the challenges that Americans have faced over the years in trying to assert that right. It's the right that's in the Second Amendment. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, historically, there was a major hurdle that the amendment had to clear in order for Americans to feel secure in that right. And the hurdle was this: the idea that the Second Amendment applied only to the state militia or to the National Guard, and it did not speak to the individual's right to keep and bear arms. Now, this idea, this interpretation, found its voice in 1939 in United States versus Miller. Jack Miller had been indicted for transporting an unregistered sawed-off shotgun across state lines in violation of the National Firearms Act of 1934. But when he went before a district court judge, it was dismissed. The indictment was dismissed as a violation of the Second Amendment. Of course, this was appealed and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overruled the district court judge, and it said this: the National Firearms Act did not violate the Second Amendment because basically a sawed-off shotgun does not have any reasonable relation to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia. In other words, the Second Amendment is about a militia. Jack, you cannot have your sawed-off shotgun. This was the prevailing interpretation for decades until 2007, when Washington, D.C. tried to enact a ban on carrying a pistol without a license, and also tried to pass a requirement that firearms be kept unloaded and locked. Now, when looking at this D.C. provision, the court asked this question: whether the following provisions violate the Second Amendment rights of individuals who are not affiliated with any state-regulated militia, but who wish to keep handguns and other firearms for private use in their homes. And they determined, yes, it is a violation of that. And it was confirmed in 2008 in the Supreme Court. They decided that the Second Amendment does confer an individual right to keep and bear arms. And that is the current judicial precedent, that we have a right to keep and bear arms. It says it. But that's not the end of it. There are still debates swirling around the constitutionality of gun control regulation. And it seems like every time there is a mass shooting, there are cries for some sort of legislative action. But you know, almost without exception, the proposed legislation would not have prevented the shooting that galvanized the anti-gun activists to begin with. And that's the proof, I think, that legislators are far more interested in erasing the Second Amendment than they are in protecting the people. There are multiple studies that confirm the premise of John Lott's book that he titled More Guns, Less Crime. But really, it's a self-evident conclusion. Before there were any studies done, in the 18th century, an Enlightenment writer named Caesar Beccaria wrote this: false is the idea of utility that sacrifices 1,000 real advantages for one imaginary or trifling inconvenience, that would take fire from men because it burns, and water because one may drown in it, that has no remedy for evils except destruction. The laws that forbid the carrying of arms are laws of such a nature. They disarm those only who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailant. They serve rather to encourage than to prevent homicide. For an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. Thomas Jefferson actually translated that quote from the Italian and copied it carefully into his own personal collection of great quotations. See, the founders understood that you could never completely remove the fire that burns, or the water that drowns, or the violence of wicked men and power-hungry rulers and oppressive governments. And so it would not do for virtuous American citizens to remain unarmed. Indeed, the House debate on the floor about the Second Amendment indicates that they were far more concerned with, in the words of Robert Shallhope, how to get arms into the hands of all American males between the ages of 18 and 45, and not how to restrict such possession to those in militia service. One of the familiar quotes of the Revolutionary era was that resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. But how can you resist tyrants if you have no means of resistance? The Second Amendment is crucial to preserving a free republic and protecting American liberties from criminal assaults, whether they're in Washington or whether they are at our back door.